This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so welcome back everyone. In our previous segment, we looked into the core essence of IT business analysis, knowing its significance, origin, etc. Now let's look into two questions. One is about why is a BA required in an IT project, and then the initial set of basic tasks that a BA would be usually doing in an IT project. Okay, so first things first. Now I request all of you to just take a look at this image, and there are 10 images actually. So spend some time, maybe a couple of minutes, go through each of this image and the text written below it, and then come up with your own interpretation of what you understand overall and put it on your on a piece of paper. Okay, do this exercise. I'll give you around a minute's time. Do this and then I'll get back to my discussion. So, okay, roughly it's 1 minute or so. So let's stop here. Yeah, fine. So I hope all of you have been able to go through this. Now, as you have contemplated across each image, you might have recognized something which is, recurring, and that is the divergence between the communication and the interpretation. In other words, what is being conveyed by one person and how it is perceived by the other person, there is a remarkable difference. Okay, for example, if you see the first image, it says how the customer explained it. Okay, if this is how the customer explained as to what he wants, then look at how the project leader understood it. He understood it in a different way, and then from there on, the way the project leader understood and explained it to the engineer, and how the engineer designed, there's a difference, so on and so forth. So finally, the end product, what the customer actually needed and what actually customer explained, also there's a huge difference. Okay, so this is to tell you that always it need not be possible that what I want and the way I express what I want is the same, and at the same time what I express versus what the other person understood need not always be the same. So that brings a huge difference. Okay, now why am I discussing about this is because if you journey back to the early 90s and 2000s, when you had IT projects spreading globally and all those things, during that point of time there was no specific role of a IT business analyst at all. You had a project manager, you had developers, you had testers, and that's it. So at that point of time, the next basic question is then who handled the business requirements, right? So this important sorry activity of understanding the requirements and engaging with stakeholders was often undertaken by the project managers. But you should also understand that project managers have a lot of other things on their plate. They are the ones who work on the overall project timelines deciding. They are the ones who work on the financial modeling of the project, what should be the onshore offshore model that is supposed to be decided, the resource management, how many developers, how many testers, how many support people are required, and all, deciding that, ensuring that if anyone is leaving, getting the other person replaced, etc. So all of these things are already something which a project manager would be busy with. On top of it, the project manager was expected to work on all of these requirements, fine tune it, get into those intricate details, and then explain it to the team. Obviously, that used to be a very difficult thing to manage, and this often resulted in missed details, which again led to a lot of project failures. And that was when, that was a turning point when the IT industry recognized that yes, there is a critical need for a dedicated role. A one person should be there, or sometimes if it's a very big project, a group of business analysts should be there who would meticulously analyze the requirements, understand the communication gap, and ensure a smooth execution. Okay, and that is how the role of a IT business analyst was born. And now these business analysts are a crucial link. Of course, in the current scenario, they are expected to do a lot more, like sometimes get into data analysis, sometimes get into the design requirements, and a lot many other things like that. But the core expectation from a BA is to ensure that whatever business objective is there and whatever is delivered at the end of the project are as much in sync as possible. Okay, now this is something which needs to be very much known, because sometimes even in interviews you might face some questions like, okay, in a typical project when we have a project manager, why do we need a business analyst? And sometimes in startups, even now, where there is always a resource crunch, you might have a single person who is doing the project management as well as doing the business analysis. Now, you need to be very much aware as to what is the probable risk involved in such an activity, or how to better manage these things. Okay, and that's the purpose of this slide. Now, let's move on to the next thing. So, now you understood that okay, a BA is required for requirements gathering, but is that the only thing, or are there more number of things that a BA needs to be involved in? So, that's what we will try to look into right now. Okay, so we'll go after one after the other point. First thing is, of course, by default requirement gathering. This is what the business analysts do. They interact with stakeholders, uncover the essential insights, analyze the business needs, and capture the detailed requirements. And that is pretty much straightforward. What is this next thing called as prioritizing? Why is it important? So usually what happens is, whenever a particular project is assigned, initially it's assumed that everything is doable within the given span of time, budget, efforts, etc., etc. But once you start detailing out the requirements, you realize that okay, the requirements that are supposed to be implemented are way more than what was actually thought of, and it might not be possible to deliver all of those in the given time frame. At that point of time, it becomes important to prioritize the requirements and say that okay, out of all these n number of requirements that are there, these are the top few requirements which we must definitely get rolling. Then these are the next set of requirements which are not very much required, but we can still look into it if time permits. And then these are the next set of requirements which can comfortably be taken up in a next phase or next launch and things like that. So this sort of prioritizing, you as a BA will not do it all by yourself, because at the end these are business requirements and the priorities also should be coming from them. But you will help the business team in prioritizing these requirements, and you'll play a very crucial role in that. Okay, and then comes the scope miss and scope creep. Both of these can be clubbed together and you can refer to it as scope management. What it usually implies is nothing but scope miss. What is a scope miss? Scope miss is like a particular crucial requirement was not at all even thought of initially when the discussions happened, when the workshops happened, and later on, in due course of time, maybe midway of the project or fag end of the project sometimes, which is a very risky scenario, but it happens that a particular important requirement sort of springs up all of a sudden, and it is realized by everyone in the project that okay, this was not considered but is very crucial in our project delivery. Okay, and that becomes like very important to make sure that such crucial requirements are also implemented. So that's a very risky scenario, as I mentioned, so we need to avoid such scope misses. I'll give you an example after scope creep. Similarly, what is a scope creep? Scope creep is nothing but it emerges when a complexity of requirement increases during the implementation. Like earlier, it was assumed it is pretty much doable and all, but once you get into the implementation phase, you realize that okay, it is not as simple as easy as it was thought of earlier. It requires a lot more analysis, implementation, workarounds, and maybe brainstorming, etc. So that is what is a scope creep. Let's take some examples here for scope creep and scope miss. Imagine you're working for a major Southeast Asian client, maybe South Korea, for example. Okay, and maybe a company like an LG or Samsung, some other XYZ company. Now, the expectation here is for a mobile app to be delivered, launched. Now, when you were in interactions with the team, business team, stakeholders, and all, you have got all the requirements and you have understood everything properly. You have documented, got the sign off everything. But later, it's realized that whatever app is supposed to be launched, it should not just be in English, but it should also support the local language, which is South Korean in this example. Now, most of the times, uh, such things will be clearly called out in the initial phase of the project itself, but assume that this local language requirement was missed out initially. Then what happens? Then at a later point of time, whenever it is realized, as I said, midway of the project or later in the project, it becomes important wherein the client says, might be this got missed out, but now that you have realized, please ensure that whenever you launch your product, that is going to have the local language also. Now, this is a very crucial requirement which was totally missed out due to mistake of whoever it is. But that becomes a scope miss. Now, what is scope creep? Now, as a continuation of this example, let's say that initially itself the business team has clearly called out saying that we need a local language support also for our app, and you as a BA have accepted that yes, we'll do it. And at the back of your mind, you're thinking it's nothing but use a simple Google Translate and translate whatever is there is in English, get it in local language, and use that in the screens which should be there on the mobile app. That was the understanding. But later, when the technical team starts developing this particular solution, then you come across realizing what are the things that go into this translation. First thing first could be that the font size of the script should be big enough for local language, or else it is difficult to read the text properly. Maybe in English, font 10 could be enough because the letters of English language are easy to understand in that. Whereas if you have to translate the same thing into local language, you might have to keep a bigger font, or else it becomes difficult to read. Now that makes a lot of difference because the entire look and feel of your every screen on the mobile app has to be relooked into, has to be redesigned so that in spite of the font being bigger in size, it doesn't really affect the user experience. The second thing could be that there could be a lot of words of English which are used in the app which do not have a direct translation into the local language. Maybe it could be a single word in English which requires 4 or 5 words, or a complete phrase in the local language, which indirectly means you have too much of text in a single screen wherever such things happen. Now these and all will involve the design team to relook into how to make it happen. Maybe additional screens have to be developed. Maybe the text has to be redefined properly. So this is increasing the scope of the project, increasing the efforts involved in it, and thereby the timelines going into implementing it. So this is a classic example of a scope creep. Okay, so as a BA, you must try to ensure that you can avoid this scope miss and scope creep as much as possible. The next major thing is conducting workshop. Of course, this is pretty much required in almost every project for a business analyst to discuss with the stakeholders, understand the pain points, analyze the requirements, provide some insights which the business team might have missed out in their analysis, and talk about the multiple solutions. All of those things will be part of your conducting the workshops. Okay. The next thing is about the documentation. based on the methodology. If it's a agile methodology, then you might have to look into epics, themes, features, user stories, etc. Whereas if it's a waterfall methodology, you might have to look into business requirement document, functional specification document, or requirement traceability matrix, etc. Sometimes you might have to create some data flow diagrams. Sometimes it could be some use case diagrams. Sometimes it could be some wireframes or prototypes. So it all depends on the type of project that you're working on and the methodology that is followed. You would have to be taking care of the documentation part. Okay. The next part is the solutioning, which is nothing but as a BA, you would be collaborating with stakeholders to understand their vision and then apply your own expertise to fine tune that solution to fulfill the business goals. Like as I told earlier, you just don't uh, blindly take in everything that has been shared by the business team. Rather, you analyze it, you help in prioritizing, you help in identifying the gaps in whatever they have mentioned, and you come up with some exception scenarios which they might not have thought of, and you will be in a position wherein you can suggest them something which can help in the overall, refining of the requirements, all those things. So these all come under part of your solutioning. Also, sometimes doing this detailed analysis, the next thing that is about your as is scenario. If you remember our food delivery app initially, what I spoke about. So having a complete understanding of as a scenario so that you can specifically call out the pain points in that as a scenario which can be thoroughly addressed in the to be scenario, right? So that sort of detailed analysis is something which you must be doing as a business analyst. And benchmarking, it is again, if you are already aware of the meaning, it's similar to that. It is nothing but if your client has a competitor in the market, and if your client wants to come up with a particular product which is better than the client's product, which is better than the competitor's product. So what is happening? The client is benchmarking with the competitor's product and saying my product should be better than his. Okay. So it could be like your client may be benchmarking with a local competitor and saying my product should be better than this, or can be competing with a national or an international competitor and saying my product should be the best in the market, better than this. Now, when that happens, it is one thing to say my product should be better than the other product, and it is yet another thing to get into the details and say my product should be better than them in terms of user experience, in terms of quicker delivery, in terms of economical, in terms of customers rating, etc., etc. So what are those parameters based on which it has to be better, and by how much? That comes under the benchmarking. And when the client is doing this benchmarking, they sometimes would involve the business analyst also in that particular brainstorming sessions and all those things. Okay. So these are the initial ones. We still have few more, but I think we can take it up in the next video. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll meet again in the next segment. Thank you.